see other national parks in representing.
Yes. So howdy, I am Lay, the CVA, the Community Volunteer Ambassador for the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. I'm going to go ahead and read our general consent statement, which is pulling up right now, starting to lag. All right, there we go. So, as a visible disclosure, we'd like to inform any participants that any and all Zoom series is and will be recorded. The purpose of this is to provide the Zoom series to those who participated or missed out on the session. It is also provided the information for participants to refer back to. In addition to the visible disclosure, this statement will be orally stated at the beginning of each Zoom series like I am right now. And I'm going to stop sharing and hand it off to our speakers today.
All right, hello everybody. My name is Sarah Jane. You have also seen my colleague Simone. Her name tag says Joshua Tree National Park. She is at Joshua Tree National Park, and she's going to hike us around a little bit. So as she was saying earlier, sometimes we have the problem of the device overheating because it's out in the sun. So if Simone goes blank, don't panic. I'm on my back porch here. That's what this structure is, but I'm like hiding in the shade. So I will be with you if Simone disappears. Don't worry, she's fine. It's just the iPad that dies inside. So thank you.
I tried to move it into the shade just now. We'll see.
Thank you all for putting where you are in the chat. We always like to get started with just like an orientation introduction. So I have my map of California here. On this map, all of the green blobs are national parks. And Joshua Tree National Park is this way down here. On my device, I can't see the chat as easily. So just give me a wiggle your hand if you have been here before. All right, excellent. So Joshua Tree National Park, as you probably know, is in the Mojave and Colorado desert. So in the Mojave Desert, like where Simone and I are, we have these Joshua trees. They get the name Joshua from some Mormon pioneers who were crossing the deserts in Utah, and they saw something, it looked like a figure with its arms outstretched in the distance. And it reminded them of Joshua from a story. The character Joshua welcomes people in the story to their new homes. So they called it the Joshua Tree. I'm going to type in the chat. Let's see if I can type and talk at the same time. The Kauai word for this plant is umichawa. So I'll put that in the chat so you can read that and kind of roll that word around in your mouth. You have several tribes that are associated with this area: the Kauai, the Serrano, the Chemehuevi, and the Mojave. So of course we are thankful for their stewardship of this area so that we can enjoy and learn all about it today. So this is Mojave Desert landscape up here. In the Colorado Desert, it looks very similar except a little bit more open. You don't see Joshua trees growing down there. It's too hot, too dry. The Colorado Desert is actually the driest part of the Sonoran Desert west of the Colorado River. It is just, it's brutal down there. Simone is showing us some choy. Wow, that's a new picture, Simone. Simone is showing us some choy cactus. We do have that famous landmark, the Cholla Cactus Garden, one of several stands, really dense stands of cholla. So if you've been down to the Cholla Cactus Garden, you have dipped your toe in the Colorado Desert. Speaking of deserts.
Okay, so we've been mentioning the Colorado and the Mojave deserts. Maybe you've heard of the Sonoran Desert too. So the Colorado is kind of like a sub-desert in the Sonoran. So this is a map of Joshua Tree National Park. So a lot of people said they were kind of in the LA, Los Angeles region, which is really broad. So depending where you are, it can be 3 to maybe 2.5-ish hours east of Los Angeles. So we're really not that far away from Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. So we do get a lot of LA visitors. And where I am standing today for reference is Black Rock Canyon Campground. So I'm this little tiny area right here. So I am in a campground. So if you do see cars, tents, it's a full campground tonight. So there might be people walking around. You can just see them. So we are the Mojave Desert. As you can see, there's a Joshua Tree behind me. So I'm in the Mojave Desert also, but kind of right down here, right in this middle, kind of the center-ish part of the park, is our transition zone. So when you're driving down, we call the Pinto Basin Road, this big mountain, Pinto Mountain. you start to see less Joshua trees and more of kind of an open, broad landscape, a lot more shrubbier plants. So when you hear that word desert, what's like your first thought? What's like the first thing that comes to mind? And I want you to just put 1 or 2 words in the chat when you hear the word desert. What's like, oh man, deserts are definitely this. Cactus. Lynn says cactus. Yes. Hot. Greg says hot. Yes, exactly. Deserts are hot. Dry. Phil says dry. Fascinating. Ooh, thank you, Carrie. Yes, deserts are very fascinating. We don't usually get that from students. Tori thinks they're boring. Yeah, it's a really common misconception, I think. Rattlesnakes. Okay, nice. The chats are rolling in. Excellent. And I'll read one more. Night sky. Excellent. Yeah, so deserts are very dry. So we are in a rain shadow, so we don't get a lot of rain. Anywhere in the world that gets less than 10 inches of rain is considered a desert. So we have very dry, sandy soils. I'm just gonna pick up some of the ground that I'm standing on right now. So I just bent down, picked it up, and maybe you can see without the glare, the ground is really very dry, but sandy and a little rocky. So we're not necessarily sandy like the sand at an ocean. We're kind of more rocky, sandy soil. So the plants and animals have to kind of survive in this type of environment or the soil. Other people said hot. Yes, deserts are hot. We've had a very hot October, a hot fall, but I like to think of deserts as extreme temperatures or extreme weather. So very, very hot in the summertime and very cold in the winter times. So thinking about our Joshua tree and all of the plants that grow in the desert have to survive in these kind of very extreme conditions, very hot and very cold. Because where I am standing today can even get snow. I believe we had snow last April, right where I am today. So extreme temperatures. And the last, let's see, I've done, oh, yes. So dry, sandy soils, extreme temperatures, and not a lot of rainfall. So those are kind of the 3 main characteristics of a desert. So we're gonna walk around. Actually, before I walk around, we are gonna talk about how some of these plants are able to adapt and survive in our desert.
Yeah, Simone and I are stoked to share with you guys some plants and animals that we have at Joshua Tree National Park. Before we send her hiking up the hill, though, we're gonna do some modeling. We do this with students because scientists use models to study things they can't see right in front of them. So the first thing that we're gonna model are some leaf shapes. So when we send Simone on her hike, she's going to hike us up to a Joshua tree and we're going to be studying its leaves. But as a contrast to that, the first thing that we want to do is make some leaf shape models of different types of trees. So the first one we're going to do will be like a broadleaf tree, maybe like an oak tree or a maple tree. To make that leaf model, I just glued all my fingers together. I'm imagining that my arm is like a little twig and my leaf is the leaf at the end. Feel free to join us in this leaf modeling activity. It is designed to be interactive. After you have your leaf formed, you're going to use your other hand to model some raindrops falling on the leaf. And you're going to show me what happens to the raindrops and to the leaves when they come together. When the rain hits the leaf, what happens? Oh, look at Ralph. Ralph pushed down his leaf because he's showing that the rain kind of pushes down on that broad leaf, right? And then the raindrops, look at Lynn. The raindrops drip onto the ground, right? Off the leaf onto the ground, which is great for broadleaf trees because they live in forests where they use their roots to suck up water from the ground. Let's model another type of tree leaf. Let's do some pine needles. I'm leaving it up to you. Oh, Simone's showing you the answer. How can we model pine needles with our fingers? Yeah, I got some pine needles. What is a white pine? 3 or 4? Okay, so you can do the same modeling activity. Use your other hand to rain onto your pine needles. See what your body wants to do. It wants to show the raindrops dripping off the pine needles onto the ground, right? Pine trees use their roots to soak up water from the ground. That's where they get their water. Now, Simone already showed you the sand here. It's super dry, it's super sandy, and there's big chunks of rock in it. So what that means is when it rains here, the water that goes on the ground moves quickly through the soil because there's those big chunks of rock. It's almost like a strainer. The water just runs down to low areas through the washes, sends big flash floods to those of us living downstream, and then disappears. So the Joshua tree's leaf shape is actually specially designed to capture water as it's falling from the sky. And we can model a Josh tree leaf, but it's going to take both your hands. If you glue all your fingers together, and then you put your pinkies together like a little cup, and now you're going to pull your elbows together, really try to seal those forearms together, and then attach your elbows to your body, like maybe around your belly button. All right, we all got one Joshua tree leaf. You can probably imagine if someone walked by you right now and spilled some water on your hands, it would go right down your pants, right? You have made a little collection gutter to gather water. I think Simone actually has a chunk of trunk to show us. The inside of a Joshua tree is really spongy. It's got a bunch of little holes. They don't grow annual growth rings. I know you're going to ask, how old are the Joshua trees? We don't know. We can't count their growth rings. The inside of them is just spongy. So they're collecting water as it falls from the sky when there are those rainstorms, directing it to their trunk where they store it all year. So Simone will take her her device there off the stand. If you get motion sick, look away. She's going to hike us up to an actual Joshua tree. We have one up that hill behind her. As she's walking, you can see those big chunks of rock on the soil. That goes down deep. So that's what contributes to the water moving so fast through the soil. And when she gets up to the Joshua tree, you're going to, well, it's taller than she is. There's a baby at the base, Simone. Maybe you can show us that too. Oh.
Here's the baby. Or I think it's the baby you're talking about. There's two.
There's baby Josh trees everywhere.
Baby Josh tree.
The baby Josh tree, you can see those gutter-shaped leaves. The big Josh tree is a little taller than Simone, so it's hard to see the leaves. But the other thing I want you to notice about the big Joshua tree is that the trunk of it is quite shaggy, quite textured. Those are all the old dead leaves that have folded down over the trunk, because that plant wants to keep its water source, which is inside of its trunk, in the shade. The cooler it can keep it, the less evaporation can take place. So the wetter it stays. So it's got green leaves, even though it hasn't rained in 8 months, because it's just feeding off of that water source that's stored inside the trunk. So Josh trees are proportional. If you're into math, if you geek out on stuff like that, the bigger the tree is, the more water they need to store. The more water they store in big, heavy branches, the heavier the branches are, the more likely they are to fall. So when you come to the park, you're probably going to notice the really unique shapes that Joshua trees take. What they're trying, I'm anthropomorphizing, of course, but what they're trying to do is balance the weight of the water in those branches with the wind, with how they do have little thin roots that are holding onto the ground. They do soak up some water from their roots. They're trying to balance those heavy branches that are full of water with the wind, with the slope, with the condition of the soil wherever they are. So that's what leads them to, sometimes people ask, why do they all have such different shapes? All trees, in fact, have different shapes. We know that, but these are really easy to see because they're out there just kind of silhouetted against the sky. Speaking of plants that store water inside of them.
All right, I'm gonna walk around to a cactus, because that was actually mentioned in the chat. That is what you think of when you hear the word desert. So this is a hedgehog cactus. I've been doing a lot of kindergarten programs, so I asked the students if it's pokey or soft. So this is a pokey plant. And so the cactus does store water similar to a Joshua tree. It has all of these spines around it to protect it from being eaten, because if it didn't have these spines, it'd be this nice green juicy trunk for an animal to want to chew on. So like the Joshua tree, the spines also provide shade for the plant. So it has all these spines. Sun. So another cactus that does store water, but not as pokey as our hedgehog, is something you might be more familiar with or see in the LA area, is a beaver tail cactus. I know LA has a lot of prickly pear, which you can eat the pads and the fruit. Beaver tail are kind of similar, I guess, in pad-like feature, but it also stores water. And all of those little dots you see are just clusters of spines. So it looks nice and soft to touch, but really this is probably my least favorite because those baby spines are extremely hard to get out. But you can see that some animals are able to kind of eat this cactus because it does not have those spines for protection. So this one looks like it got chewed on earlier on, because some of our animals are able to eat past those smaller spines. And one more plant that we have that's really common in both the deserts, the Mojave and the Colorado, and that is our creosote. So this is really, really common shrub that we see in the desert. And I really like the creosote because you can blow on the leaf and then give it a smell. And it has a nice smell of rain or water. So whenever I'm missing rain or the smell of creosote, I can just blow on the leaf and get that smell whenever I want. So it has this nice shiny leaf. It might be a little hard to see right now with the sun, but that shiny leaf is trapping water. So it's got this sort of, we call it a waxy coating, so water can't evaporate from its leaves. So all of our plants are trying to find ways to store water, because as we know, it does not rain in the desert that often. I'm just walking over to one more plant. Yeah, you can see how dry it's been. One more plant here, and this is another really common cactus, the cholla cactus. And again, lots of spines. These spines are a little lighter in color. So a lot of desert plants are not dark colored plants. They're kind of like a pale green or maybe like a light yellow or a white almost. And that light color helps the plant reflect sunlight to stay cooler. And again, this cactus has lots of spines providing shade for its trunk to protect it from the sun. This one's really interesting. I call it a silver cholla. Sometimes there's another type of cholla called a jumping cholla. And people might call it that because the ends of these spines have a little tiny hook. So it's like the tiny hook. And if that hook gets caught on your skin or your clothing or something, the whole branch is going to detach. So instead of the whole plant falling out of the ground with you, just it breaks off little tiny branches. So actually this cholla has dropped a branch right here. So it just came from this plant down. So I think that's where people call it jumping cholla sometimes, because the plant is detaching branches. It's not jumping, it's just getting caught on something and naturally falling off. All right, I'm gonna head back down the hill here, our little hike.
Simone's walking, you're gonna notice she's walking by a bunch of you'll
Sorry,
notice
I'm walking.
she's walking by a bunch of dead looking plants. This is another adaptation that desert plants have. Most of those bushes go dormant in the summertime, you know, like around the rest of the country. Trees lose their leaves in the autumn because winter is going to be too extreme for their leaves to survive. Our desert bushes lose their leaves at the end of spring, and then they're dormant all summer into the fall. Once we get our winter monsoons, they'll grow leaves, they'll make flowers, they'll make seeds really quickly. It's a joke that this park was originally supposed to be called Desert Plants National Monument. We have incredible plant diversity, like 750 different species of plants that we know of that grow here. But when the representatives from Washington came out, they were like, desert plants, these plants all look dead. So we are Joshua Tree National Park because that was the only green looking plant they could see when they came out here. Those plants are not dead, they are alive. Please encourage your friends not to park on top of them when they come visit the park and can't find a parking spot. They're just dormant, they're gonna grow again and starting later this winter. Okay, we have some animals that we wanted to show you that live here. Although if you work at Santa Monica Mountains, you're probably not going to be impressed by these since you apparently get to see baby bobcats all the time. So just that we'll go through these really quick, and then we want to make sure that we get to your questions. Someone mentioned that there's often really expansive questioning after these, so we'll just fly through these. The first one we always show groups is the coyote. Coyotes live across North America. They're incredibly well adapted to living where people are. So our desert coyotes usually hunt in smaller groups. If you think about it, when a coyote hunts with a pack, they have to share their meal with everyone in their pack. And in the desert, they're only getting small food like rabbits or ground squirrels. They don't want to share those. So often coyotes are in smaller groups for hunting, except this time of year, October, they do kind of group up for mating season. Simone has a coyote pelt there, so you can kind of see how it blends in. They're kind of a light color in the desert, so they really blend in. In the summertime, they come out at nighttime. In the wintertime, they can come out during the daytime. So they're highly adaptive.
Yeah, and I hear them pretty often right now. Actually, they're pretty active right as the sun is setting. All right, so the next animal, we're gonna have you try to guess this one. I'm gonna give a few hints and you can put your guess in the chat. This one is a desert bird. Actually, you might have it in Santa Monica Mountains too. So desert birds or Southern California bird, and it hunts its food on the ground, and it's a carnivore. It's a carnivorous bird that hunts its food on the ground. Roadrunner, oh my gosh, of course you guys got it. Easy one. Roadrunner, one of my favorite birds to see. I've seen quite a few roadrunners lately, so I'm not sure they're really active right now. So a roadrunner has this longer beak right here, and that helps them sort of strike their food first. So they're eating young rattlesnakes, scorpions, lizards, mice. I've seen a roadrunner leaving Black Rock, where I am today, with a mouse in its beak before. So they're pretty much hunting smallish animal size. So this is a roadrunner skull. So we can see that its beak has that sort of longer look compared to some other really common birds, which are a quail. So our quail beak, if we look at this one, is a much smaller in size. So it's going to eat smaller seeds, nuts, and berries. And so the quail are eating kind of like the plant material versus the roadrunner using its beak to eat more meat. And its tail is really interesting, that it kind of acts like a steering wheel for it. So it's running super fast, and its tail helps it control and make those sharp turns. Roadrunners can fly, however, Sarah Jane might be able to correct me on this. They can't fly very high or very long, so they kind of like fall back down to the ground. But yes, they do. They are mainly spotted on the ground, but I have occasionally seen a roadrunner fly. Ooh, all right. Am I doing the next one, or are you doing the next one, Sarah Jane?
I'll do the next one. Just real quick, we want to show you the bighorn sheep. So these are animals that are rare to see in the park, but if you do see one, they do live here. They're super cool to see. Simone's got a bighorn sheephorn there to show you. These guys are herbivores. They mostly stay up in the rocks. This time of year, you'll see them in big groups. They are they're often found near water sources. Sometimes people do the hike at Barker Dam in hopes of seeing bighorn sheep out there. That reservoir has been dry for most of the summer since we haven't had any rain. So if you do see one, go buy a lottery ticket. You're very lucky.
They have like a white bottom behind them. That's how you can maybe spot them, because they're extremely well camouflaged. All right, and I just wanted to mention that we have a pretty good variety of bat species. I know it's almost Halloween, so I love talking about bats. It's Bat Week next week. So we have a hoary bat here. So it's got this sort of like whitish fur, and that was to like demonstrate frost, I guess. And so it, I guess, blended in when it was flying around in frosty environment. So this is one type of bat we have here. We also have little brown bat. Do we have, Mexican free-tailed bat. So many different bat species, but it is exciting to spot our bats because they're the only mammal that can fly, which is amazing. And next week is Bat Week. So the NPS does have a lot of awesome bat activities and virtual events going on.
Okay, the final animal we'll mention, and then we want to hear all your questions, is our desert tortoise. This animal is on the endangered species list. Right now it's listed as threatened. Their habitat just is shrinking, and they're super susceptible to being hit by cars on the road. One of our biggest problems right now is that ravens, the blackbirds, ravens, did not traditionally live in the Mojave Desert, but they're so good at living where people live that when there started to be a lot of people living here that produced a lot of trash, there started to be a lot of ravens living here. When a tortoise first hatches out of its egg, its shell, which is its backbone, is soft, kind of like a human infant's skull is soft after they're first born. So it's really easy for ravens to peck through the shell of those little bitty tortoises. So our biologists they'll find a raven nest with 30, 50 shells of hatchling tortoises underneath it, because the ravens have learned that's a really easy food for them. So tortoises don't have any, historically natural predators in the desert that would prey upon them when they're so small. But now that there's ravens here, the populations are just being decimated. So when you come to the park, you'll see our signage about the tortoises. We have our little phrase, look below before you go. There are just horrific stories that I wish I didn't have to tell you about, where tortoises have crawled underneath someone's car for shade. And then when that person gets in the car, they back up and they hear the pop of their car tires crushing the tortoise's shell. So please, if you come visit the park, just have a kiddo or ask someone to bend down and look under your car before you leave so you don't accidentally crush a tortoise. They are starting to be active again in the fall. They come out, they crawl around, like try to get some water, try to have a little snack. They'll be underground all winter and then they come out in the spring, but it's always a good idea to be tortoise aware when you're visiting the park. Super cool animals to see, really special. We want to do all we can to try to help them out.
And they can go almost a full year without drinking water. So they're able to stay underground for long time. I think they spend 90% of their life in a burrow, which is essentially a hole dug by an animal underground.
That's how I feel this year too.
Yeah, we're burrowing too.
If y'all have questions, you can put them in a chat or however usually works. Usually we let a teacher call in people. I don't. If you find yourselves talking over one another, just throw your questions in the chat and we'll make sure that we get to them. Oh, Greg is asking, can the raven population be controlled? Oh, Greg, I wonder that too. They have done some targeted controls of really problem ravens. So when they find those big nests, they try to eliminate those ravens, but there are so many ravens. There are so many open dumpsters in the in the populated areas around Joshua Tree National Park that can the raven population be controlled? I think the answer is it is unlikely that the raven population can be.
They can do raven egg oiling too. So that's pretty common where they'll basically, I'm not exactly sure how it all works out, but they'll, biologists will go out, actually our inventory and monitoring team will go out into these, again, targeted raven populations. So they've already found like a lot of baby tortoise shells here because ravens will teach their young to prey on baby tortoises. They're very, very smart birds. And so they'll go out and actually oil the eggs of the raven. I'm not sure what type of oil, but it prevents them from hatching. So that does kind of keep the population down. Ravens, oh yes, Ralph, to clarify, we do not have crows, we only have ravens.
Carrie's asking, have any soakers been put in place for the bighorn? I think it's like a bubbler, we might call that. There are what usually happens in the summer is if the biologists determine that the bighorn sheep are at a critical scarcity of water supply, we close natural sources of water. So you might show up to the park and discover that 49 Palms Canyon Trail is closed. That's to hikers. That's to allow bighorn sheep to come down into that natural water source. So bubblers are really tough to manage in the desert because there's not groundwater here. We can't like pump water up from the ground because the water table doesn't exist in so many places. Underneath the ground is just more rock formations. So what you'll see the park doing is closing areas where bighorn sheep have access to natural water instead of installing bubblers for them to access.
Another question was, do animals eat creosote? I don't actually know if they eat the leaves. Maybe Sarah Jane can help me, but I know like pack rats will store the seed pods after they flower. Do you have an answer on that? If you've seen animals eat the creosote?
I am under the impression that animals do not eat the creosote because of that really pungent smell. So the creosote has juicy green leaves year round, which are protected by that waxy coating. And then the defense against, animals browsing on them is that they have that really, if you ever smell it, I mean, it's a great smell, but it definitely does not make me hungry. So we have some pretty desperate critters right now, at least in my neck of the woods. I'm seeing a lot of cactus nibbling by rodents, but I have not seen any animals eating the creosote. Oh, Greg is asking,
I'm just reading some of the
yeah, there's a couple here. So there was news about huge numbers of Joshua trees drying out about a year or two ago. Is that still happening? Is there a replanting program? Tori, I don't know about huge numbers of Joshua trees drying out. They definitely have a fairly short life cycle. So we don't think Joshua trees get to be more than maybe 150 years old or so. And then they just dry out and new Joshua trees, dying out. Sorry, I just read that too fast. We did have a drought. That historic 5-year drought was super stressful on Joshua trees. They store water inside of themselves. They need to have that water replenished. So our scientists are doing climate change models, and they're predicting that a lot of places that Joshua trees historically lived in are not going to be suitable for Joshua trees in the future. So we have established areas where Joshua trees are healthy. There are baby Joshua trees that are growing, and those will be our top priorities to protect in case of a wildfire. So yeah, as climate change progresses, these are pretty picky plants. They have a really specific water requirement. They don't like it when it's too hot. We're at the very southern end of their range already. This is not a great place for Joshua trees to grow. So Greg is asking, did the Joshua tree recently become listed as endangered species? The thing that happened recently is that the Fish and Game will do an investigation to see if they can be listed. So we had to, the community in the southern part of the Mojave Desert pushed for Fish and Game to do that investigation to see if they could qualify to be listed, and that proposal went through. So now Fish and Game will spend time studying to decide whether or not in California Joshua trees can be under some sort of protected species status.
Yeah, so Joshua trees start here in Joshua Tree National Park, as Sarah Jane mentioned. So a lot of people might think, oh, they only grow in Joshua Tree. They actually grow north from here. So there's a lot of Joshua trees also in Nevada and a little tiny bit of Utah and into a little bit of Arizona as well. So really, Mojave National Preserve, which is sort of just the park to the north of us, has a pretty healthy stand of Joshua trees that are also protected, which is good. Yeah, and as Sarah Jane was saying, that we look at those refugia. So those are the tiny little the patches that have been modeled to just determine maybe where our Joshua tree is going to do well in 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now. And we do have ongoing citizen science happening. So we do take volunteers to come and monitor our Joshua trees, and because we need to study them to see what is going to happen in those years, because the modeling can show us something, but we need to be on the ground in real time, putting in data and research.
Ralph asked if there are any other yuccas. Yeah, Simone pans a little bit to the east. She can show you.
I can walk up to another yucca.
We do have Mojave yuccas. So if you're traveling to the park and you see something that looks like a Joshua tree but is a lot shorter, the scientific name for Joshua trees is Yucca brevifolia, which means short-leafed yucca. So we do have these Mojave yuccas. They have much longer leaves with a much more dramatic gutter-shaped leaf. They get shorter than Joshua trees, but they grow stouter, kind of wider trunks. Again, that proportion of the bigger a plant is, the more water it needs. They also readily clone themselves. Joshua trees do this too. They send up pups from underground. But yuccas, I feel like usually when you see a yucca, you see it with its little family all around it. So there'll be a big clump of them, like Simone is showing. Yeah, Ralph, cholla branches, that's our number one propagation method. They fall off and then they grow new cholla. That's why we get those big spreads of cholla, like the cholla garden. Those cholla, they will flower and they make fruits, but their seeds are not viable. They're relying on cloning themselves, which is a really interesting question when you start thinking about, well, how old is a cholla if, it was growing a branch that same thing with the Joshua trees and the yuccas, they sprout themselves. So when scientists are trying to estimate the ages of desert plants, we get curious as they fall off tourists. Yes, those tourists will.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but it would be a lot easier for me to ask this rather than type it, if you don't mind. So I took a picture of a Joshua, I took a picture of a yucca on my iNaturalist, and it came back and said Joshua tree. And I was very confused because I didn't think that looked like a Joshua tree. And then I started reading about it, and it, like you just said, Joshua trees are yucca. So my question is, are all yuccas Joshua trees, or are all Joshua trees yuccas?
That's a good question. So yucca is the family, right? And then there are species. So we have the Mojave yucca, we have Yucca brevifolia, which is the Joshua tree. Simone, you want to say some more species of yuccas? Because I'm out since we only have 2 here.
Those are the only 2 yuccas I know. There is another. I can't remember the second Joshua tree species, because there is, I think, a pretty heavily
there are subspecies,
decided that if the Joshua tree you're seeing, if you go to Las Vegas, is a little different than the Joshua tree, the Yucca brevifolia you see in this campground, because this campground has your very classic looking Joshua trees, pretty good sized trunks, very sort of geometrical branching, I guess, versus if you go to the Las Vegas area or Death Valley, the Joshua trees, I think the trunk is a little bit skinnier in size and a lot more branches. and I'm blanking on the name of that,
I wanna
the scientific
say-
name for that, but I can only think of the two yucca, Yucca brevifolia, Yucca shadigra. There is
I think there are a
third
lot of them.
plant
I want to
that
say
does.
banana
ahead.
yucca. I think in landscaping,
yeah,
so
banana
throughout
yucca.
Mexico, I know there's something called banana yucca that you can grow ornamentally. There's got to be tons of yuccas. Sorry for our ignorance.
Oh, I thought you were
We're
talking
just partial
about
to two
here
of them.
in Josh Tree.
No. Ornamentally, there are so many yuccas. Here, we just have the two.
And there's a third plant that is not growing in this area, but that kind of almost looks like a Mojave yucca, the plant I was just showing. It's called a Perinolina, and it's in a different family altogether. But it has very bendable, flexible leaves. That's how you can really tell them apart. Is the Mojave yucca, Yucca shadigra, has a very thick leaf with kind of white fibers that kind of peel off, versus the Perinolina has a very thin, very flexible leaf. So 3 plants that look very similar here in the desert.
Oh, Mel, I love this question. Simone, do you want this question? This is a great question, Mel. We both love it. We'll fight over it.
Hold on, which one is it?
Oh, she hasn't read it yet. I'm going to answer it.
Sorry,
Okay, Mel's
I didn't
asking, has
see
the
the
desert
question.
always been a desert? Yes, the climate was very different thousands of years ago. So during the last ice age, 12,000 years ago, this area was very wet. So the rest of North America is covered by glaciers. Down here in Southern California, all the runoff is coming down here. We are super wet, and we know that because we found fossils of those ice age megafauna, like y'all have at La Brea tar pits. So giant Shasta ground sloths and Columbian mammoths and horses the size of golden retrievers. We had really green areas, and part of that too is even before that time, before the ice age, those mountains, the San Bernardino mountains, are really young mountains. So that rain shadow effect that Simone was mentioning, the reason we're a desert is because those mountains knock down all the heavy clouds before they can get over to us. Those mountains are only, geologically speaking, recently uplifted. So only recently has this area, again, geologically speaking, recently has this area been blocked from receiving all that moisture from the coast. So has the desert always been a desert? No, the climate was very different thousands of years ago. And the animals that existed then are those ice age megafauna that you guys have seen all the fossils of over at La Brea tar pits. Great question, Mel. Thanks for asking that.
Yeah, those giant ground sloths are very cool, because that's how the Josh tree spread. Because they paleontologists have found Josh tree seeds in the poop of giant ground sloths, so they would poop it out, and those Josh trees would begin to reproduce, populate. So we don't have those anymore, so it's interesting. The Josh trees aren't able to spread in the range that they were able to millions of years ago. Oh, one more question popped up.
What kind of reptiles are in Josh Tree? We have the tortoises, of course, that's our most charismatic reptile, but we have a bunch of different species of rattlesnakes. We have other types of snakes too, and we have a plethora of species of lizards. So lizard snakes and tortoises are the reptiles that we have in Josh Tree. The desert is a very friendly place for reptiles to be. We want to thank everyone so much for their time today. We know we ran way over our time. Sorry, Simone and I get really enthusiastic about our topic. If you have more questions that you can't find answers to, or you want to send me your iNaturalist observations, the organizer of this has our contact information. You can always reach out to the park, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, and hello to all the other rangers from the other parks and volunteers. Thank you for volunteering for our national parks.
Thanks, everyone.
Guys, really interesting.
Thank you.
Very educational.
See everyone later.